All right. There we go. Okay. Don't know what that was about, but again, welcome. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. I do see that folks are still coming into the room, so I apologize. And I think, Kellen, you're able to admit people. If you can try to catch that, at least we'll play off each other here. But I just want to make sure that I am able to get started and I respect everyone's time. So again, welcome everyone. I am Jice Johnson. I am the founder and the Chief Visionary Officer for BBI Professional Services, previously known as Black Business Initiative. And I am going to We're going to talk a little bit about what's going on in the economy. And as we talk about these things, I'm going to start by making some introductions to my partners and also to talk a little bit just briefly about OEdit, who is sponsoring this. But today, what I think is going to be most important for you to know and take away is that today is not about getting answers. Today is about getting information and helping you synthesize that information. So I want to give you a little bit of a warning because we're going over four kind of heavy topics, and we're going to start all of that by talking about a general overview of what the market is doing. I'm going to be really clear to go over definitions and things like that because some of you may not be familiar with some of the things that we're talking about, and I want to make sure that no one is getting left behind. So I just want to make sure that we are in a space where if you are really familiar with the things that are going on, that you're okay, with kind of taking a little bit of a slower pace, but I think you'll still get something great out of this. If you are, brand new into the space, you've never really taken a look at the market, you have no idea what I'm talking about, make sure that you hold on to your questions. We're going to stop at the end of each section to kind of go through some questions that you have. This is designed to be interactive. I want to make sure that you get something out of it. I think you will get something out of it. Otherwise, I wouldn't be doing it because this is truly a labor of love. But I think that it is really important for what is taking place and a lot of the things that are going on. And I call this inflection point because there's a lot happening kind of all at once. So with that, I'm going to talk about our sponsor, and then I'm going to turn it over to our partner, the Denver SBDC, to introduce themselves. But I'll talk really quickly about our partner, which is the State of Colorado Office of Economic Development and International Trade, where we are contracted with them to support Colorado-based businesses to access capital that they need to support and grow their business. So if you are a Colorado-based business and you are interested in learning how we can help you, we have free one-on-one technical support, as well as support to help you access some of the lending programs that the state of Colorado is supporting and others. We don't push you into any one particular program, but we want to make sure that you are aware that the state does support some lending programs and to see if you qualify. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague and friend here, Kellen, who can introduce the Denver SBDC.
Hi, and thanks, Jice. Hello, everybody, and welcome. I'm letting everybody in as they come in. But my name is Kellen Lanier. I am the director of the Denver Metro SBDC. And just a little bit about the SBDC as you go into this session here, just to keep top of mind of ways that we can help put into action some of the things that you're going to hear today. So, SBDC has been around since the 80s, and our role is to help businesses, specifically small businesses, create a pathway forward for whatever that looks like for them. So whether that is starting up your business for the first time, whether that is you've been in business for 20, 30 years and you are looking to exit, we cover all of those things and everything in between. The SBDC.
Wait 1 second, Kellen. I'm sorry. I accidentally muted you. I was muting everyone and I accidentally muted you.
No, that's fine. I caught it right away. So nobody missed
Sorry about that.
Yeah.
All right.
So we provide free advising, and free to low cost workshops. So right now, with Denver specifically, we are coming up on a another round of our leading edge program that is specifically built for people that are looking to kind of build out their business plan in a very curated way, with assistance along the way. Later on this year, you'll start seeing some things about our trout tank program, which, since it's Colorado, instead of a shark, we don't have sharks here, uh, but we do have trout. Um, so, so we will be having that program, um, in partnership with Red Rocks Community College, and yeah, be on the lookout for that. That one's always a lot of fun, and this will be the last year of a small format for that program. We will have a much bigger format program with much bigger prize money where you can actually do something with. So if you are looking to compete in a pitch, please be on the lookout for that. So everything we do is free, it's confidential. Virtually unlimited. There are some limits. We're obviously not going to be your therapist, but we love to see you, over time, and to help your business grow. That's the whole purpose we exist. A lot of times, I hear from people that say, "Hey, I did not know that the SBDC does things for free." That is 90% of what we do is for free. So we make it as low of a barrier to entry as possible. I will, in the chat, once everybody's done introducing themselves, I will drop our email that you can email, as well as our website, if you have any questions. And we do partner with BBI from time to time, so you may run across some programs where you interact with them as well. So that is us, and I'll probably be tuning in a little bit, as this session goes on, to provide some insight just from my former advisor side of things. But yeah, I will be looking at the chat, trying to answer questions that anybody has, if they pop up. But as Jice said, hold on to those questions as much as you can. But I understand sometimes, they're called burning questions for a reason. So we'll be here for that. All right. Thanks, Jice.
Awesome. All right. So, for those of you that are new or are not familiar with BBI, I will just give you a brief overview. We are a capacity building and advisory firm. We work with governments, financial institutions, and community organizations, as well as with businesses individually. So, we do assessments and coaching, navigation and curriculum development, and capital readiness and skills building. And we focus on supporting small and medium-sized enterprises. In particular, we want to help you move beyond your bottlenecks, increase your revenue, and also strengthen your operations. So that's just a little bit about us. Some of you may be familiar with us, some of you may not, but we would love to learn a little bit more about you and your business. And so again, I'll take that moment to invite you to make sure that you're introducing yourself in the chat. This is a place and a space where you can network. There are folks that are significantly here from the Denver metro area and Colorado, but there are also folks that are tuning in from all over the country. So make sure you also drop your city and let us know where you're tuning in from. All right. So with that, I already talked a little bit about the fact that we are in a wide range of rooms and experiences, and that is intentional. We didn't target this towards any specific level of business because there's a lot that is shifting, and we want to make sure that our businesses are prepared and understand what's taking place. There are terms that may need explanation. I'm going to do my best to provide those. If you need additional support, don't be afraid to ask, to say, "Hey, I don't know what that means," or "Can you repeat that?" We're going to pause again, as like I said, at the end of each segment for questions. And then at the end, we're going to open up for a discussion in general. I always think that the best intelligence is in this room. There are a ton of really smart folks that are doing some amazing things that are already in the space. If you have something to add to the conversation, I want you to make sure that you feel comfortable to share and bring your expertise to the room. That being said, while we're talking about the economy, there could be a lot of emotions that come up with what's going on. This is not a space where we're really discussing politics. I'm looking to kill the sensationalism and really just bring a lot of clarity. So, in this space, I want you to know we're not predicting the future. We're not telling you what's going to happen. What we are doing is we're looking at the data right now so that we can actually see what's happening and how it applies to you and your business. Another thing that's going to be important is that two truths can coexist at the same time. There are going to be some things that may seem to contradict each other. It's not that they are contradicting per se, it's that they're coexisting. And so we got to be able to hold some of that. And then another thing that I think is going to be important to remember is that there might be some things that are difficult ahead, and there might be some things that are opportunity ahead. And it might depend where you are in terms of whether that looks like it's difficult or whether it looks like it's an opportunity. But just know again that these things can be happening simultaneously. And then our job is to help you think through your decisions with some clear eyes. So with that, I'm going to jump in and I'm going to start talking about what the data is actually telling us right now. There's a ton of data. If you don't track the economy, that could be a little bit confusing because there's a lot of different reports that exist tracking all different types of things. I pulled what I believe are some of the most important reports that matter to you and your business. But again, if you are someone that is in this space, feel free to drop other reports that you think might be important in the chat, and we'll talk through the ones that I've pulled here. So the first one that I want to talk about is that inflation is running at more than double the target. And a lot of times, if we're talking about inflation, we may not really know exactly how that's affecting us. So the first thing that's important to know is that the Fed is targeting roughly a 2% inflation rate. That's what they believe is healthy. There's a lot of talk about what's going on at the Fed, whether they're raising rates, whether they're keeping rates the same or lowering rates rather. But what we should know is that right now, this is as of May of 2026, that the inflation is running at more than double the target rate. And it's been running high for 2 straight years now. So 24 months of above the target rate. So, how does this affect you? Ultimately, this is looking at what your buying power it looks like. So, if a last year $100 bought you 10 widgets, right? Whatever your widgets are, right now, based on inflation, that same $100 may only buy you, let's say, 9.6. But since you're probably not buying zero point 0.6 of a widget, let's just call it 9 widgets, right? So if $100 bought you 10 widgets, now $100 is buying you 9 widgets. That's been happening every month for the last 2 years. So if you are looking at your profit margin and you're saying, I was making this and I'm not making that now, that's potentially where your profit margin has gone, is in the increase in prices. So if you haven't adjusted your prices over the last 18 months or so, that may be something to consider as you're thinking going forward, because that inflation is running high and we're not sure when that inflation rate may be coming down. So that's something that is, if you're seeing your margin disappear, you should know that that's not something that's happening just to you personally. It's not something that you're doing or doing wrong in your business. That's what's happening in the marketplace. So as we're looking at that happening, it's not just happening in the marketplace, right? That's happening to the people that are buying from you. So those people are starting to pull back. So one of the reports that I pulled here is the NFIB. That's the National Federation of Independent Business. Now, the National Federation of Independent Business, or the NFIB, they survey thousands of small business owners every month. They have an uncertainty index. Right now, that uncertainty index is sitting at 88. Historically, that uncertainty index sits at 68. So what that means is that uncertainty is running really high for small businesses right now. Um, and when it's running really high for really long, it changes behavior. So, what this means is that uncertainty has been going on for quite some time. And now, because that has gone on for so long, consumers are beginning to change their behavior around what they're buying. So that, at first it was like, oh, yeah, maybe this will pass. And now, as it hasn't passed, they're saying, I actually think I need to start making some adjustments. So, behavior is starting to shift, right? And when this happens, when behavior starts to shift, one of the things that we know is that business owners stop making decisions. They start pausing. And I'll talk a little bit more about that a little bit further down, but just know that business owners start to pause, okay? Now, the next one is there's the conference board. The conference board measures how confident everyday people feel about spending. And right now, two-thirds of consumers are saying that they are actively cutting back because their prices are too high. So, as a part of this conference board, there is a component called the expectations index. This is what people think is coming. So this is them thinking about ahead, right? What they think is coming down the pipe. This has been below 80 since February of last year. Historically, when that number stays below 80 for any extended period of time, a recession follows within 12 months. So since February of last year, this number has been below 80. Okay. So again, this is just expectations, not telling you what's to happen, but historically, what we see following is a recession. The last one that I pulled in this space is the University of Michigan. The University of Michigan's consumer sentiment has hit a record low. They are currently sitting at 44.8. This is the third straight month, as of May, this is the third straight month that their consumer sentiment has been in decline. And it's the steepest drop of all the kind of low income consumers. This is around, I'm sorry, the steepest drop that they're seeing is with low income consumers. So for the most part, they're seeing a drop in people who may be low income, people without college degrees. They are seeing a steep drop in their overall feeling about spending. This is oftentimes the consumer base for a significant portion of our businesses. So we should be aware that these folks are feeling severe economic pressure right now. And so this is what the measurement is showing us. All right, so the next thing that I want to talk about with regard to the market is how tariffs are hitting. Now, at the beginning of last year, when this administration was hitting folks left and right with tariffs, there was a whole lot of noise. And then we're still hearing about tariffs kind of in the background, but a lot of the initial press that was covering it has started to go away. So what we know is that when things are not in the news cycles, a lot of times we can forget that they're going on. But tariffs are, in fact, still affecting businesses in a pretty hefty way. So, what we do know for sure, so I just want to make sure that this is clear, a tariff is a tax on goods that are coming into the country from another country. And what's important to know here is that small and medium-sized businesses actually make up most of US importers. So while we talk about what's happening kind of on the high level with big corporations, the vast majority of folks that are getting hit with, or their businesses are getting hit with the impacts of tariffs are small US importers. And it's important to, really understand that how the supply chain is set up there. But um, as we understand the supply chain, the large corporations had a little bit of a better kind of luck here with kind of hedging against some of these, and also as the government is or I should say maybe the judicial system is striking down the way that these tariffs have been produced. And there's still talk about how this is going to come back. We're not quite sure what this is going to look like for consumers to be kind of reimbursed, or I'm sorry, not consumers, small businesses to figure out how they're going to be reimbursed, if they're going to be reimbursed by the impacts of these tariffs. But as things have started to kind of settle out, what we should know is that 61% of businesses, small businesses, report having been negatively impacted by tariffs in their operations. What we also know is that 73% of the top supply chain factors identified tariffs as the number one supply chain concern. So this is above labor, this is above data privacy, and this is above environmental issues. What they're looking at is their supply chain. And then there are 62% of businesses that feel like they have missed out on sales due to supply chain disruptions. So a lot that's kind of happening in there. The bigger problem is not necessarily the tariff level. It really is the unpredictability that's still taking place right now. So if a business kind of knows what to expect, they can adapt, right? They can stabilize their costs. When a business doesn't know what to expect, they have a harder time kind of planning around, and that instability has been freezing decisions for a lot of businesses. And so even if you're buying American, you may still be affected because your supplier likely buys from someone who imports. So that could be like your packaging, that could be your equipment parts, that could be ingredients, right? So the supply chain is long, and those tariffs ripple through that in ways that aren't always visible immediately on the surface. So they are still hitting, our Main Street operations. They are still having a pretty hefty effect on businesses, and businesses are reporting that they're feeling those effects. Now, I mentioned that when things get a little bit, weird, right? Businesses start to pause, and that could look interesting for business owners. So here's a few things that we should be aware of. Um, Businesses right now appear to be in a holding pattern. Right now, a lot of smaller businesses are not investing. Well, I should say businesses in general, it's also at the higher level, but a lot of businesses are not investing. They are not hiring at the rates that they were. So we know that we've been hearing a little bit about that in the news cycle. But a lot of businesses are watching, they are waiting. And what I guess what's important to know here is that when businesses are in this kind of wait and see pattern, um, when enough of those businesses are in a wait and see pattern simultaneously, there's an aggregate effect. Because what it does is it basically deepens a downturn, an economic downturn. It starts to contract. So, because businesses don't know what to expect, because we've had so much volatility that's going on, a lot of business owners are just holding. And it's one thing if you're one business that's holding, it's another thing when a lot of businesses are holding. When a lot of businesses are holding, this means that we start to see it kind of speeds up an economic contraction, right? Because it's a larger signal. So what could you be doing while others are pausing, right? Is you could be positioning yourself because there's going to be a lot of shifts that are taking place. I think, just to look at the numbers that we're talking about right now, only 16% of businesses are planning any capital outlays for the next 3 to 6 months. So again, they're holding, right? This is the lowest though since 2009. So this is even lower than the pandemic. There's a net 9% of businesses that are planning to add workers. Again, the lowest since the pandemic began. And then 64%, as I mentioned before, are reporting supply chain disruptions of some sort. So businesses are kind of taking a moment to pause and try to figure out what's going on. So I want to just kind of paint a through line in terms of what's going on within the economy, right? Because again, you could be looking at this as opportunity, or you could be looking at this as some pain coming down the line. And again, we could be holding both of those, right? But I do want to give you some research. I felt like this was important. Um, this is not advice. This is not advice. This is just research over what has happened over the last three recessions over just short of 5,000 companies. Okay. And so this data comes from Harvard, the Harvard Business School. But for businesses that just cut everything and just kind of tried to hunker down and wait out the volatility in the market, 21% of those emerge stronger, right? So if your strategy is pause and just hold tight, you've got about a 1 in 5 chance of emerging stronger as things start to stabilize, whenever things start to stabilize. Um, there are businesses that cut selectively, and then they begin to make sure that they were protecting people and protecting their marketing efforts. So for those businesses that got strategic about where they cut, they emerged at roughly 37% of them emerged stronger. So almost 40%, let's say, let's call it 2 out of every 5 emerged stronger. Those that decided to maintain their marketing during a downturn, 17% of them experienced compound growth during the downturn, not after it, right? So at the top, we're talking about who came out of the downturn. During the downturn, there are folks that started to see returns on their investment, specifically those that maintained their marketing when things were receding. And then this is really important. Those that slash their marketing, 80% of the folks that have slashed their marketing had not recovered pre the recession. or I was they didn't recover their pre-recession revenue. So even if they stayed alive, they did not fully recover even 3 years after the recession. So we don't know exactly where all that's going to sit. But as you're thinking about what you're going to do, right, it might be important for you to think about how to protect your cash, marketing, so staying close to your customers, cutting what isn't building anything, which is going to require for you to do some research into your business to figure out what's performing, what's not. And then this might be one of the most important things is you're going to have to make decisions with incomplete information rather than just waiting for certainty. All right, so again, not a single right answer for every business, but as we're thinking about what's going on, this is what the data is, and I want you to just, try to hold on to that. All right, so this is kind of what's going on in the market right now. What are you seeing in your business or your clients' businesses that you feel like maybe isn't getting captured, or do you have questions? And I'm going to see if I can look at the chat now. Questions around what's going on in the market and how it might pertain to your business. And if you have a question, feel free to come off of mute and just ask. I'm just trying to make sure I didn't miss any questions that are in the chat. And someone asked, is this for Colorado residents only? No, it's not. This is general information for everyone, but it's being sponsored by businesses that are or organizations that are in Colorado. But welcome from Phoenix. And could we do this for the Colorado chambers? Yes, we can. All right. I don't see any questions so far. Oh, yep. I don't see any questions so far. So is it safe to assume that we can move on from here? Everything I said about the market was clear. All right. All right. Well, let's keep going. Okay, so I want to talk next about the K-shaped economy. How many of you have heard that we are in a K-shaped economy? If you have already heard that, like if this is not news to you, you've heard that we are in a K-shaped economy, drop a 1 in the chat. And if you are like, nope, don't know what this is, don't know what's going on, drop a 2 in the chat. All right, we got a little bit of both going on. Okay. Awesome. All right. Well, let's talk about it. So everyone walks out of here understanding what a K-shaped economy actually means. All right. So K in your mind, right? It's going in these two different directions. The top arm is going up, the bottom arm is going down. Both of those arms are going at the same time. That's important, right? So at the top of the K, what we have is um, there we go. All right, the economy is moving in two different directions at once. At the top of the K, what we have are large corporations, high income earners, tech sector, and asset owners. At the bottom of the K, these are the folks that are going down. Small businesses, lower income workers, communities of color, traditional industries are trending down. So this is the same economy. Everyone is in the same space, and we're going in two different directions simultaneously. Now, the Fed said this back during COVID. Then they kind of quieted this conversation. It almost seemed like possibly maybe that there was some correction. And now I believe it was last month, I believe it was May, that the Fed actually said again that we are officially in a K-shaped economy. And what is very important for us to know is that what they're describing, they believe is now structural. This is not a temporary gap. The K is actually widening, and this is where we are. So the top 1% of Americans right now own about 32% of the nation's net worth. The bottom 50 own 2.5%. So that's really important for us to understand that lower income households are increasingly borrowing just to maintain their standard of living. So they're not borrowing to get assets, they're borrowing to maintain month to month. Um, General Mills, for whatever that's worth, General Mills actually puts out a consumer sentiment report, or I'm sorry, they actually put out more like an economic report. And they put that out because General Mills, like why General Mills, right? General Mills, because General Mills is a run-of-the-mill kind of everyday cereal. It is purchased by middle and low income households. And so when they see things happening within their revenue streams, right, it helps them to have a better understanding of what's actually taking place in the market. So as of 2026, General Mills cut their revenue outlook because, again, it was citing that there's weak consumer sentiment, right? So we've been talking about that. This is happening through pretty much all of the economic indicators, as we can see, is that the everyday consumer is under some serious pressure. So what does that look like, right? Now, conversely, what we know also in terms of corporate earnings is that we have the magnificent seven tech companies, right? Right now in the S&P 500, they are the vast majority of the S&P 500 growth right now, over 20% projected earnings for 2026, while all of the other 493 S&P 500 companies are only expecting about a 4% projected growth. So a very slow marginal growth over the course of the year as compared to the seven tech companies, right? So when we're talking about this K-shape, again, what we're seeing is the everyday spender going down. We see corporations going up, but we also see a lot of large corporations that are having really slow growth. What I think we should understand about what this K-shaped economy is to understand how unequal the United States is, right? So some of these, again, you may not know what these are, but you should know what these are. There is something called the Gini coefficient. This is a global measure of income inequality. Now, this is a little bit complicated to explain. What I will say is that the US is basically one of, or the most let me see, the most unequal in high income countries in the world. So we're looking at Germany, Canada, France, the UK, and then the United States. And so just to try to give you like an idea of what this means, if all incomes were equal across the US, right? And just picture this, if all incomes across the US were equal, if all of us here earn the same amount, the Gini coefficient would be at 0. If all of the wealth or income was concentrated into just one person, it would be at 100. Okay. So maximum inequality is one person owns everything, 99.999% of everyone else owns nothing, right? One owns everything, no one else owns anything. That's 100. 0 is everyone owns everything across the board. So again, if you haven't heard of this, this just gives you an indicator of where inequality is going, and this is looked at on a global scale. There's a lot of inequality that happens globally. What we're looking at right now are basically what we're calling like well, for the most part, we'll just call them Western countries. But we're looking at the countries that are high income countries in the world, right? And the US is right up there at the top, just short of Mexico. Um, This is something that I think is also important for us to have an understanding about is where we might not be seeing these cuts, but where these cuts are actually taking place. So federal dollars, here's what's interesting, right? So we saw in the beginning of this administration that there was a lot of cutting to programs and kind of all of these things that were going on, right? So we know Doge came in, there was a lot of flash, there was job loss, programmatic loss, all of these things. So now what is actually taking place though is that federal-based spending is starting to go back up. So what does that growth look like? And why aren't local communities actually feeling that? So while the federal spending is up, direct program spending to communities has decreased. And what has happened is a lot of that spending is going through things like tax credits and incentives. So those credits and incentives were at 66%. Now they are at 84% of all the major programs. So sometimes when we're talking about where all these large corporations are, people, when they're talking about the wealthy are getting these tax cuts and these tax breaks, or not being taxed, right? A significant portion of federal dollars are going into tax credits and incentives. And what this means is that the private sector is controlling more of where the federal community dollars actually are landing. So instead of those dollars going into the communities and having the communities determine how those dollars are placed inside of the community, private dollars are capturing federal spending essentially. So we're seeing the numbers go up, and it looks like the federal government is spending more money inside of our communities, but who's controlling those dollars is the private sector. Does that make sense? So this is why when I started off, I said we might be holding a few things, right, that are happening all at once. The spending is up. We're not seeing it. And why we're not seeing it is because of where the spending is actually going. There we go. All right. Now, here's what we should know is that the K-shape is not a new condition for everyone that is in this room. When we're talking about the K-shaped economy, again, this kind of emerged around 2020. I think that sometimes we're missing a little bit of a deeper truth, and I think this matters. Black communities, and also for many Latino communities, or working class communities of color, the K-shape is actually not a new development. It has been a persistent structural condition for a really long time. And the numbers here are pretty clear. For example, the median Black household income is about $56,000. The national average is $121,000. Okay. That gap is on purpose. And it is an accumulated result of specific structural conditions in housing, in lending, in business access, and in education. And so this K shape that we see is showing the reinforcement of those inequities. When the K shape accelerates, and I think this is important, when the K shape accelerates, the bottom arm that's already under a lot of structural pressure is then under compounded pressure. So what we know right now is that the Black unemployment rate is up. It rose 3 times faster um, in the last year, or overall rate rather. Historically, Black workers are the first fired and the last hired in economic downturns. So this pattern is holding true to what that looks like. Now you have to add that approximately 271,000 federal jobs were eliminated. This disproportionately impacts Black workers. Federal employment has historically been one of the primary middle class pathways for Black households. What we have now effectively is the Minority Business Development Agency, or the MBDA, has been dismantled. This was the only federal agency that was dedicated exclusively to minority-owned businesses. 38 business centers have shut down, and the staff has gone from 100 to 1. The SBA 8A program has gone down from 2,100 companies, newly admitted firms, down to 65. That's a 97% collapse. So the programs that were being put in place have been eliminated, jobs have been eliminated, unemployment is up. This is reinforcing what that K-shape looks like for communities of color, and in particular, Black communities. There are 3 forces that are driving the K, and I just want to close around this, and then we'll open up again for questions. 3 forces that are driving the K. Wealth is concentrating at the top. This is faster than the economy is able to redistribute it, wealth is concentrating at the top. I'm not even 100% sure if there is a focus on redistributing that wealth within this administration. Federal dollars are being routed through private gatekeepers. Dollars that are meant for communities are essentially going to private corporations, over 80% of them, 80% of federal dollars for communities. Communities with the most weight have the fewest tools. So this is explaining why what we're hearing is GDP, is growing, albeit small, right? And also customers are cutting back. So we're seeing these two different things happen at once. We're seeing federal investment increase on paper, but communities are not feeling that. So two things happening at one time. Some questions for us to consider specific to our business with regard to the K-shape, right? And this is what matters. Who is my customer and which arm of the K are they living on? Or living on. You don't want to assume this. You want to start looking at the data. You want to start talking to folks, right? Start asking your customers, do they feel like everything is going well for them? Do they feel like things are really tightening up? If my customer is under economic pressure, am I delivering enough value to be the thing that they keep or the thing that they cut? Um, if you're a business that's looking at how to survive this K-shaped economy, right? You have to be asking yourself if you are where you're positioning yourself. And I want to be clear without guiding your direction. Being the cheapest in a downturn is not always the most effective for a business. So you have to ask yourself again, where are your customers? Are your customers experiencing an upward trajectory? Are they on the upside of the K? Or are they experiencing a contraction and they're on the downside of the K? So are you racing to the bottom on your pricing when maybe you could be looking at going deeper on your value? How are you embedded in your customer's actual life or business? And does that relationship go deeper than just the transaction? Is my cost structure lean enough to stay sustainable if my customer spending tightens further? Right? So you're asking yourself questions about where your customer is sitting and also where your value is. One thing that I think maybe we should remember in this space, if it's not clear as to what I'm saying as well, because I feel like I haven't maybe made this point, but the middle class is effectively disappearing. So I will say this, and I'm going to say this under my business strategist hat. Um, if you are targeting middle income, meaning you try to have kind of a middle of the road pricing strategy, that's the one that you want to reconsider the most, right? So if you are targeting folks who are on the bottom side of the K, where you want to make sure that you are of value and that when they're looking at their expenses and they're having to think about what to cut, they don't want to cut you, right? You want to look at that. If you're looking on the upper side of the K, where you're saying, "Hey, my customers are looking to, they're continuing to spend money. They have discretionary spending." You might want to be considering where your pricing sits in that. If you're looking at, "Hey, I've always tried to go middle of the road," that middle of the road is disappearing. That middle of the road is disappearing. Okay. Questions. Do you understand what the K-shaped economy means? Do you understand that we are not coming out of the K-shaped economy? There's no predictions right now that says we're coming out of the K-shaped economy. No predictions that are coming out to say that. Do you understand how that is affecting your business? May affect your business. Sorry. And I'm opening up the chat to see. Okay. And you don't have to wait in the chat. If you have a question, feel free to come off of mute. I must be doing an amazing job of explaining all the things because y'all don't have no questions.
Jice, I have a question.
Shoot. I was like, no, I have no questions. All right.
So, I have a transportation respite service
Mhm,
that targets the elderly population.
mhm,
Um, I have seen a shift in my clientele in that the people that used to be able to afford me, now they cannot no longer afford me. And so I am struggling with, do I go into the Medicaid, Medicare route, even though I haven't been doing that? Um, and I know that right now might not be the right time to focus in that area, but I'm thinking of the silver tsunami, as they call it, and more people are probably going to be put onto Medicare and Medicaid. And if that's true, do I focus some of my business towards those people that are in that category, or do I just focus on the private pay that I have been currently focusing on in those higher income levels?
What I would say is that this is going to be a space where you have to stay up to date with what's going on. We're actually getting ready to talk about demographics. And also to your point, the silver tsunami. I mean, we are in the United States is experiencing a trend in aging demographics, right? So folks are aging. That being said, services to folks have been in the news a lot lately because it's very unclear as to what this administration or what this Congress intends to do around um, how to support our communities, right? Or how to support the everyday average person who's paid into these services. So I don't know how to answer that question just yet. What I would say is that this is something that you should be aware of because where like the need is going to increase, where the
Right.
dollars come from is going to be the question. And for that, I'm not sure that we have an answer for that yet, but
Hmm.
that would mean that that's something you should consider. And if you're not already, to your point, doing if you're not on a Medicaid program or have access to that, you should consider. I know here in Colorado, they've adjusted like what services they cut and what they didn't, right?
Exactly.
So you'll have to stay up to date specifically on where they're placing that emphasis, right? Or where they're placing those dollars. And as folks start to retire, right, we don't know exactly what this is going to look like. I don't want to stray too far off topic, but what I will say is that there's also a lot going on with, or at least in the news, in terms of how retirement accounts are sitting, right? Especially when things
Uh-huh.
start to go down. So I'm not 100% sure, right? And I think
Right.
that that's part of what's happening here is like we don't have all the answers. What we do have is we need to be aware of what's taking place so we can be asking the right questions and know what we should be looking for or know what we should be looking into so we can start to make more and better informed decisions about what to do. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah,
Thank you.
of course. And then I did see Dana, I hope I'm pronouncing it right. Dana said, does this mean that luxury price services and experiences will continue to have a market, but only to the 1% shooting up the K vertical? The short answer to that is yes. I would say it's probably larger than the 1%, but for sure, folks that are earning higher incomes do still have discretionary spending. They are still looking for services. They are still looking for experiences. They are not currently in a contracted state. So if you are looking at, again, if you've been in that middle of the road pricing, or if you're already doing, luxury pricing, or if you're not and you're thinking about where do you want to go next, right? Consider how to evaluate your pricing strategy, considering that the middle class is disappearing and you have folks that are heading up or you have folks that are heading down. And so who do you want to be servicing? Let's see, seems like of course, of course. Sorry, hold on. I think I missed. Seems to me like the communities embarked on the largest. I don't disagree with you about what the community needs to do. However, I'm not going to address that particular in this particular conversation. But I would agree, folks got to start thinking about what to do for a significant amount of folks that are headed in the down part of that K. Um, To what extent is the K-shaped economy fundamentally a story about labor versus capital, where owning assets matters more than working? I think that's an interesting question. Um, there's a lot going on in the labor space, right? And I'll talk a little bit about that again in the demographics and also in the silver tsunami. But what I would say is that it depends on how you own the assets, right? And what asset that you own. So for example, if the primary asset that you own is your home, and also you're struggling to make ends meet, that asset could become a burden. Not saying that renting wouldn't either, but that asset could become a burden if not used or considered strategically. If you have income producing assets, right, or assets that are trending and trending up, that could provide you with a little bit of relief. I think the kind of the general sentiment is that when if you in a capitalist society, ownership is key. So let me maybe phrase it that way, right? But folks lose a lot going into recessions. So you have to be kind of thinking about where you're sitting. So I don't know that it's necessarily that it's a story about labor versus capital. um, I think that that story was told quite some time ago, and we didn't catch it early enough to have prevented a K-shaped economy. So we're in it now. And what we do about that is a good question. But like I said, there's not any predictions currently that says that we're going to come out of a K-shaped economy. This is also why, again, I want to pull this outside of the like you can't fully separate the economy from politics, but this isn't a political conversation. This is saying that for quite some time, under both Democrats and Republicans, the economy has not been working well for everyone. And now we're at an inflection point, right? We're at a point where the economy is very clearly moving in two different directions simultaneously with no outlook for a return back to a strong middle class. We have to ask ourselves what that means. How does that affect us as individuals, and how does that affect our businesses as we figure out how to navigate what's coming? So I'm not sure if that really answers that, but like hopefully that gives you some context in terms of at least how I see it. Do you have any suggestions for a seasonal summer business on pricing? We are in the middle of the road pricing, but we have so little time to shift. Yeah, I mean, the my short answer would be you've got to almost do an immediate like CEO session, dig back into your business model. Hopefully you have something. I always recommend people having something like a business model canvas because it's a quick iteration for your business, right? So you can kind of see everything at once and then begin to make some quick adjustments. But if that's the case, and this is like what's happening right now, right? So we're in the middle of this shift. You might, if your business is seasonal, you might be looking at how to hunker down. You might be one of those folks that need to hunker down and get through this season and then consider what that looks like for the next season, because by next summer we're not going to be out of a K-shaped economy. So if you feel like, hey, we're already in the middle of it, right, this might be the time to just push through. But then once you're out of your season, how are you thinking about the adjustments that you need to make for your business going forward? And if you feel like you have the time, you're saying we have a little time, but if you feel like you have the time, then maybe sit down in a good CEO session with yourself or with your team and figure out how to make that shift more immediately. Awesome. Thank you. Okay. All right. So if I don't see any other questions. You're welcome. I don't see any other questions. But again, we'll have another time to open up at the end, but just keep these things in mind. So hopefully what you're seeing is that these things are starting to layer, like what's kind of happening at the top of the economy, what's now happening structurally within the economy. And then we're going to now talk about what's going on from a demographic perspective, because the demographics are for sure changing. So we do know that there's the aging, and we'll still talk about that, of course. When people are saying demographics, right, in the small business context, they're usually talking about the aging population, and we are going to look at that. But demographics means a full picture of who is making up the population. And there are several major shifts that are happening simultaneously. Each one has direct consequences for what gets bought, who is buying it, who works, who's starting a business, and who your competition is. Okay. So the first thing is, let's start with our 10,000 10,000 boomers are reaching the age of retirement every single day. Now, what's really important for us to know is that by 2030, that is in 3.5 years, right? By 2030, every boomer, every boomer will be 65 and older, okay? Every one of them. So that is 1 in 5 Americans, right? In 3.5 years. This is coming, it's already in motion, and there's going to be a wave of what this looks like. The spending patterns of this group are pretty specific. So, healthcare, home services, accessibility features, experiences, simplicity. Many of them have paid off their mortgages, they have retirement savings, right? And they are not price shopping at the bottom. Not everyone, many of them. They spend on quality, they spend on convenience, they spend on services that reduce friction in their life. So if your business touches any of those categories and you haven't thought specifically about how to serve this customer, right? You are sitting in front of a growing market. Now, we have two demographics that most businesses are underserving. Let's see here. First is the Latino market. Between now and 2030, Latinos will account for 78% of all new workers entering the US economy. So that is a primary workforce growth story in the US, right? Latino entrepreneurs are starting businesses now faster than other demographics. So for quite some time, the Black community was starting businesses faster than any other demographics. That has shifted. That has shifted. Latino businesses are starting businesses faster than any other demographic. If your hiring pipeline, your marketing, and your products don't reflect this, you might be behind on a curve, and it's probably only going to get steeper. So, the second one that we should know is these Gen Zers. I have a Gen Z daughter, y'all. She worries me. This is the most racially and ethnically diverse generation in American history. They operate differently as workers. We know that. They need flexibility, transparency, and a purpose are some of their baseline expectations. So they are not as interested in perks, right? Like prior generations, like my generation and generations before us. They are worried about flexibility, transparency, and purpose. They operate differently also as consumers. So they research before buying. They trust their peer recommendations over any sort of brand advertising, and they are absolutely willing to walk away from businesses whose values don't align. As I said, I have a Gen Zer. I am consistently giving her the side eye. What's happening? But they are already entrepreneurs. Some of their businesses are already competing with yours right now. So people who are under 30 may have just, they are starting a lot of these businesses using AI tools and social media. So these are two markets that are here, and you can start to look at your business and ask, are these markets that your business is serving? Are these markets your business should be serving? So you can learn more about these markets. There we go. All right. Another shift that's happening, immigration and the labor supply. I want to tread really carefully here because this is not a political conversation about why these numbers are the way they are. It is about that they are the way they are. So, immigration, political hot topic, but I'm going to talk about what the economic data is saying because the economic consequences are apolitical. These numbers are coming from the US Census Bureau, and these are their estimates. The net international migration has dropped from 2.73 million in 2024, and it's projected to be 321,000 this month.
Holy shit.
That is an 88% decline in roughly 2 years. Now, why does this matter for businesses? For two reasons. First, your labor supply. Immigrant workers are a critical part of the workforce in construction, agriculture, food service, healthcare support, and logistics. So when that pipeline shrinks this fast, the labor shortages are not easing, they are intensifying. And second, we have a consumer base. I'm sorry, the second is your consumer base and business formation. Immigrants are customers, they are renters, they are entrepreneurs. They start businesses at high rates and they spend in local economies. So, whatever your view is in terms of the policy that's driving this, the economic effect is still going to be the same. And it does require for you to consider how your business and how you should respond. Another shift that's taking place is where people are and are not, right? Building their lives. There are two realities that are affecting specific business types. So, one is household formation delay. Millennials and Gen Z are buying homes and starting families significantly later. This delay, this delays a chain of spending. This delays a chain of spending in furniture, appliances, childcare, home renovations, and that type of consumption essentially that kicks off when people are settling into the home buying or home life stages. If your business serves people in those milestones, your addressable market is contracting as a percentage of the population. So even if the national population is holding, that specific group of folks that would typically be into those types of things, that's contracting. The next thing is geography. Secondary cities are starting to gain a lot of residents. Rural markets and some legacy urban areas are contracting, but the number that matters for your business is the specific demographic trajectory of the market where you actually operate. So, not the national picture, right? Your market, understanding that trajectory is going to give you information, is going to give you an information advantage over businesses that are just reading like national headlines. So, wherever it is that your business is located, start to understand the geographic shifts that are happening in your area. That's something for you to do specific to your business. And then last, what's very interesting, and we've talked about this not here necessarily, but it's been out and about, right? Is that by 2045, there's not going to be a single racial majority. So the demographic shifts are already happening. By 2030, the Hispanic population is going to increase. Major cities become very plural, minority, but essentially by 2045, the U.S. population will not have a one major racial group. It is going to be a majority minority, and no single group will hold the majority status. Now, this is important because if you are not already building relationships in diverse communities, right, then you are not building with the customer base and the talent pipeline that is expected to be here over the next 20 years. So, again, consider what your demographic of your business actually looks like and who you should be thinking about or starting how you're going to start building more diverse relationships or relationships in diverse communities as a part of your both customer base and your talent pipeline. This is where we are headed. So this is what's going on demographically in our country. I'll open up for questions. Are you feeling any of these demographic shifts? Do you feel like some of these are opportunities? Do you feel like some of these are problems? What questions do we have?
Hey, Jice. Quick question on the demographic slide.
Mhm.
It it showed that by 2045 there will be no major, no any one single major race or whatever racial group. But
Mhm.
which racial group is growing the fastest? And would that still be in the space of the Hispanic community?
Yep.
Or okay. So then
Yep.
is there a projection that then speaks to by 2045 or 2050, this will be the largest racial group?
No. Well, at least that's not what my data has stated, that's not what the data has said to me or my interpretation of it. What it said to me is that there's that one group is growing, but that by 2045, um, essentially will be a very, I mean, we're already kind of a melting pot, but there's pockets of where we're melting pots, right? Like you're going to look at large cities and you're going to see this, the diversity. But ultimately, what they're saying is that by 2045, there's not going to be, um, for the most part, what they're telling you is that the white community will no longer be the majority demographic in the country by 2045. But I
Right.
don't have an indication of specifically like which demographic is going to take, if there's a demographic that's going to take time. Like, I don't think that we're going to be a majority Hispanic country anymore. Does that make sense? Or a
Yeah,
majority
it
Latino
does.
country? Is that what you're asking? Like, are we projected to now go from being a majority white country to a majority Latino country?
Well, so one of our programs that we operate in the Georgia area and Atlanta, as well as in the San Francisco Bay Area. And so in the Bay Area, we started off maybe 10 years ago serving Black youth and families. But as the demographics change and the shift has taken place, and there's a mass exodus of Black families from California, the largest demographic in the region, there are Latino communities. And
Mhm.
so that's one of the shifts that we like directly experience. I know that's in California, and they've had a very particular trajectory for a long time.
Yeah, the short answer is I don't have an answer for that. But what I would say is that all of our businesses should be looking at in the markets that we serve, maybe what the projections are of those specific geographies, right? And then as a whole, we should know that the country is just becoming more diverse. And so if there is a specific target demographic that you serve, take a look and see what the trajectory is for that. Does that make sense? That would be how I would advise anyone who is looking at the demographics of their business.
Thank you.
Mhm. Hopefully that's helpful. Um, any other questions on how these demographics are moving? Anyone see any demographic that was surprising? Or were all these like, I could see it? All right.
I have a question.
Okay. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry. Were you saying something? It looks like Mario.
Yeah, well, I live in the Southeast, and I was just curious about the demographics. I've always heard about the Latino population in the U.S. And I'm thinking maybe because we're close to Mexico, and there's a lot of people moving over. And not sure how this whole ICE thing will affect that, but I'm just curious, like in the Southeast, what is the projected demographics? Because we're concentrated here,
Mhm.
Black population.
Yeah, I mean, the same thing that I was just explaining to Mark. I didn't pull the specific demographics for like each region of the country. What I'm explaining is that the entire country's demographics are shifting. So some of that is aging, some of that is the Latino community, some of that is Gen Z in general, which again is the most diverse, generation that we've ever had. And so, what I would look at is wherever it is that you're doing business. So, if you're doing business in the Southeast, I would go in and start specifically looking for the demographic trajectory of the Southeast. That would be like a takeaway that I would apply to what I need to do to my business in order for me to determine how, like, am I in the right price? Am I serving the right community with what, value, with what product and service, et cetera. So you can begin to make some of the decisions that you'll need for your business based on the specific geography that you're serving. Hopefully that makes sense. But I
Okay,
didn't
that
pull.
makes sense.
Okay,
Yeah,
yeah, I was gonna say for this right here, I didn't pull like specific geographies to say which geographic location is doing what.
okay, I get it.
Yeah. But thank you for that question. But that would be, again, I want folks to know how to take this to their business, right? Like I would do that, right? Can you go deeper into demographic shifts towards secondary cities? Are those people typically in the 1% is that lower class movement? You know what? That's a good question. And I will try to do a follow-up and answer that question because I actually don't know. But what I do know is that folks are starting to figure out how to migrate around because of cost factors, right? So sometimes living in rural areas can just be really expensive because you're lacking a lot of the amenities. Also, inside of the major cities, it's really expensive. So folks are definitely starting to move around to try to find places that feel more affordable. So I don't know that that's just the 1%. I don't know that that's just lower class movement, but that's a really good question, one that I want to make a note of and try to find out a little bit more about. So thank you for asking that. Sorry, I can't answer more, but I'll look into it.
No worries. No, thank you. It's easier just to come off mute. So, and when you're saying secondary cities, you're talking like Atlanta, Memphis, Nashville, right? Not like Chicago, New York.
No, I mean, no, secondary cities, I'm looking at like, I mean, I don't know, in the Atlanta area, you might, I don't know what would be a secondary city to Atlanta, but I don't know. I mean, like outside of the immediate metro area.
Okay, so like the suburban area markets.
Yes, where they're trying to find better affordability, not too far away. This is also why the rural areas are experiencing, like so there's this contrast, right? It's like I can't find nothing and I need to be a little bit further back because it's too much all happening at once. Does that make sense? Like people are trying to figure out the pricing. And so
Yeah,
right now they're kind of moving to where they feel like it's a little bit less expensive, but still being able to get to amenities.
got it. Thanks.
Do you know any proposed solutions? Oh, I'm sorry. Do you, there you go, Hateville and Forest Park. Thank you. I was like, I don't know what's outside of Metro Atlanta's big. Do you know any proposed solutions, innovations to address the labor supply due to the 88% drop in migration? I don't. I don't. I don't. I think these are things we should be looking at, right? But again, and not to beat a dead horse, but like I feel like this is the important information, right? Which is why we're having this roundtable because I'm not hearing information like this where businesses are getting really clear information on what is actually happening, so we can strategize. And so like some of these things that are already happening, like a drop in immigration, right? Like that's already happening. And we've been hearing about it, right? I mean, if you're in agriculture, we've been hearing about, what that looks like. If you're in food service, we've been hearing about what this looks like. I'm not in those markets specifically, so I don't know what they're doing to cover down, but people are struggling. People are closing their doors, right? So we need to have this information so that we can start to think and ask our businesses the tough questions and figure out what we do need to do because of this, or how we do shift. There's two things happening at once. You have immigration, so there's labor on that side, but you also have, for example, the Black community is experiencing a very high level of unemployment. Are there opportunities to make those connections? Where else do we do it? How else do we use maybe some of the other tools that are at our disposal? Are there places for AI in some of these places? I don't know. Are there ways to condense and collaborate and create partnerships or joint ventures or cooperatives, right? That we can help to move and shift labor around. So I say, I started off by saying I don't have like this particular session, this roundtable is here for us to talk things through and to get information. I don't necessarily have the answers. I didn't come with answers, but I think that this is an opportunity for us to start learning about maybe what we're hearing in other places. Is there anybody here who's had shortages in their labor and has figured out how to get through it or is still trying to figure out how to get through it? And we can have some of those conversations in the chat or when we open up for everyone. But I hope that, that makes sense that like I don't have that answer. I think that there's a significant amount of folks in the country who are trying to figure that out right now, but we can't even figure it out if we don't know really, really what's happening. Um, awesome. Okay. All right. I don't see any other questions. All right. I hope that this is helpful so far. So we're going to go into, and I'm sorry, I haven't been looking on credit you're on, right? I don't think that I
Yeah, I'm
gave
here.
you. Awesome. Let me just make you a co-host. All right. So the next section, we have two more sections that we're going to talk about today, guys. The next section that we're going to get into is around AI, and I'm gonna frame this, and then I'm going to open this up to Credit McCullough, who can talk to you a little bit more. But there's a lot of noise around AI, right? And so what we want to do is we want to get in and give you a really clear picture about what's happening and what's not happening so we can kind of cut through some of that noise and really have a better understanding of, where we actually are in this space. There's been some adjustments in predictions, right? So what does this actually look like for your business? And Greta, I'm gonna turn it over to you.
Okay. Are you going to do the slides or do I
Yep,
need
I
to
got
just?
you.
Okay, right on.
There we go.
Hey, everybody. I am Greta McCullough. I am a certified AI consultant. I build with AI every day. Everything Jice just walked you through, that's the world that AI is landing in. So I'm going to give you a real picture here. So like Jice said, the apocalypse didn't just happen. MIT said it last month. No mass displacement. The former head of the BLS is at Stanford now, and his words were, we have time to prepare, because only 1 in 5 companies is even using this in real life in their business right now. So a lot of people haven't even started, but the corporations that are using it, most of them are failing at it. 95% of big company AI pilots, they don't produce a whole lot of financial return. And that's data from MIT as well. So they rushed in without like clean data because everybody was like, oh, AI, right? So they didn't have a real plan and they hit a wall. But the cool thing about small businesses is that they don't necessarily have that problem. They can always start clean. What's actually happening is, next slide, is that Stanford looked at 950 job types. Entry-level workers were 22 to 25 in repetitive task roles with scheduling, data entry, customer service routing. 16%, they had a headcount drop, okay? So those are the entry points. The experienced people with relationships and judgment, those headcounts actually grew. Now, the same entry-level roles have been historically how Black workers built something towards something bigger. And with Black unemployment rising 3 times faster than the overall rate right now, that's really like not a coincidence. That's a compounding problem, which is exactly why ownership and building your own thing with these tools, with these AI tools, matter so much right now. So using it versus building it, 77% of small businesses are touching AI tools, but only 1.3% have actually built it into how they compete. So there's a real difference between using a tool and building with a tool, right? So one is like driving past the gym, and the other one is like having a training program in the gym, okay? And 90% of all strategic AI investment is happening with 1% of companies. And that gap is where your opportunity as a small business owner, it lies. The bigger players are liking this in, but the window for small businesses to move is now before the gap continues to get wider. So the real competitive threat is that your competitor is using AI to outgrow, while you're kind of still sitting still if you haven't been using it. And I like to say, if you're not using it at least 30 minutes a day, then you already are behind, okay? So 4 times more businesses say that AI increased their hiring than reducing it. And growing businesses, they hire, right? And the businesses that are using AI effectively are expanding in what's considered a down market right now. And even the corporations who are actually doing it right, like everything right, they have their budgets, they have their teams, they have their strategies, most of them won't see a financial return for 2 to 4 years. And only 6% see a payback with using AI inside of the 12 months. And only 29% of companies invested millions or more are seeing significant results right now. So the name for this is called the J curve. So when I think of the J curve, I just think picture a J, right? So when you first implement these tools, productivity actually dips. So your team is learning, workflows are getting reorganized, habits are being built. So that's the bottom of the J. Okay. And then once it's embedded, that's when you climb, and you climb past where you started. So corporations hit that dip and they panic because they're answering to shareholders every 90 days. So they can't afford to really wait it out. So they scrap the whole thing, and that's where the 95% failure stat comes in. But you don't necessarily have that problem. You answer to yourself. So you can sit at the bottom of that J. You can continue to build that habit and ride that curve, ride it all the way up. Okay. So that's an advantage that billion-dollar companies, they really don't have. Okay. So the tech stack warning, real quick, watch how these tools price themselves. So they come in cheap, right? You can get a free trial. A lot of times we forget about free trials, right? But they come in cheap, and they come in like this to build your dependency. Okay. Your data goes in, your workflows get built around them, and then the price goes up. Okay. That's their business model. That's how they operate. So one tool used well beats 5 that don't even connect to each other. So I like to say, before you commit to anything, know if you can actually export your data, know what happens if the price doubles, know that you can exit before you enter. Okay. So
Before you
how
go,
to
I just want
actually,
to, my bad credit.
that's
I
okay.
want to really warn us here in this space, right? Because I want to drill this in, that there is a deliberate pricing or business model that's happening, right? And as I said, it's the hook and raise model. So what credit is saying that y'all need to really, really, really pay attention to is, you do need to know how these tools work. They do increase your productivity. They are helping businesses to move forward, and they are underpricing the true cost of what it looks like. So these businesses are currently losing money in order to hook you. So you should not go in blind to this situation. You should really have an understanding of what you're using it for, how you're optimizing it, and also understanding how easy it is to get a bunch of tools where all of a sudden you have a lot of costs that start to go up. So it went from
Yep.
free tool to, I'm using this tool and it's only $20, and then this tool's only $20, and this tool's only $50, and next thing you know, you're spending hundreds of dollars across
Yep.
several tools that you're using on a daily basis inside of your business. And for sure, they have said this is the strategy. Once you are locked in, once they know how you move, what they are taking heed of how you're operating in this space. So then once you're locked in, it's going to bump up. And we've seen this time and time again. Y'all know when you started doing Facebook ads, right? And
Yep.
Google ads, right? And there was a couple of cents. Now you can be paying thousands of dollars for ads, right? When you were in there, you were an Amazon seller early on, and you had this big margin when you were selling on Amazon. One of the main things Amazon sellers complain about now is that their margin has shrunk, right? And it's because Amazon is taking more and more and more of the dollars. They have increased what it takes for them to keep you on their platform. So this is a model that we've seen. It's a model that it happens through a process of erosion, like over time. And we should be really, really aware going in, eyes clear about what we're doing and what we're relying on, because it is going to increase your productivity, and that could be really addictive. And so that convenience is important for you to weigh that out over time. So I don't want to jump in too much credit, but I just wanted to like really, really nail
No,
that home. Like, we need to know what's going on, because it's helpful, and it will get more expensive, and we will rely on it more. So you can get to a point where you feel like, I'm gonna just have to pay the cost because I can't do anything about it. It's
exactly.
in here now.
I am actually having that issue with with an app I built in Lovable. And right now it's in beta, but I keep getting these notifications saying your AI time is up, your AI time is up. And I'm thinking, well, I'm spending $50 a month for this to work. Why is my AI time up? So now just like Jice said, I scrap the app or I continue to pay into these AI credits. So this is a real situation, and my apologies for going over it so fast, but that is
No, not at
real
all.
time.
I just wanted to make sure that we were eyes open.
Yeah, eyes open, y'all, for real. All right, so okay, the tech stack. So how to start, right? So 3 things that you can do. I'll always say to first audit your time. Write down the tasks that you do every single day, every single week, that don't actually need your brain per se. Scheduling, follow-up emails, answering the same 5 customer questions, any type of first drafts, right? That's your starting point. And always to say, do not copy straight out of AI. Please don't copy straight out of AI. Always read what it gives you and then add your own nuances into it. Okay, do not copy straight out of AI. All right. Second, pick one of the tasks and find one tool. I say find one tool, give it 30 days. Write down how long that task takes today before you even start, so you actually have a real number. Okay. And then decide right now what you're doing with your time, or what you're doing with the time that you're going to get back. Are you spending it on sales calls? Are you spending it on customer follow-up, a new offer, right? Because if you don't decide before you start, then the time is going to disappear and your revenue is going to stay stagnant. Okay. So one tool, one task. Okay. One place to put the time. And that's what makes this actually work for your bottom line. And I see Jice has 5 here. So yeah, measure your time, decide what you'll do with the recovered time before you start. Okay.
Yeah. Thank you for that credit. Yeah, I think that's really important also, because when, like we said, it is going to increase your productivity. But if you're not redeploying that productivity into something that's actually increasing your revenue, then all you're doing is transferring one from one expense to another, right? But you actually need to be
Exactly.
thinking, hey, if I recover 2 hours of my day because I've been able to automate these tasks, what am I doing with those 2 hours to then grow my revenue? And if you don't have a plan for
Absolutely.
that, right, you'll kind of just get caught up in the busy work. And y'all know I deal with entrepreneurs. I shouldn't say deal. I love y'all. I work with entrepreneurs. I have to deal with these entrepreneurs. I work with entrepreneurs on a very regular basis, right? And I can tell you for sure, it's very easy for us to get caught up in a lot of busy work. So when we find something that helps us to increase our productivity, we have to use that time, right? We don't just get it back. We use that time to grow our business, right? So
Yeah.
thank you so much, Credit. Are there questions, or was there anything else that you wanted to add? And then we'll open up for questions on this segment.
No, I was just you ran everything down. I was just gonna say, like, the structural barriers that you named this morning, they're real, but and these tools don't necessarily fix that. But they just give us a real way to build revenue and ownership inside of it. So that's all I had.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
You're
All right,
welcome.
everyone, give Credit a round of applause. Thank you so much, Credit. And then also drop your business information, Credit, in the chat, so that if you are interested, Credit, well, you tell them what you do, Credit, and then
So I
and make sure.
am So I'm a message and alignment strategist, and I'm also an AI consultant. So what I like to do, because I'm so techie, I use AI tools to help businesses increase their revenue in so many ways. I won't go into like specifics because I don't want to take up the time, but I'm going to put my contact information in, and you can hit me up with questions or whatever you need.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Credit.
Thank
All right,
you.
so we are in our, do we have questions? I'm sorry, I didn't check. Do we have questions?
I have one question,
Yep.
just, and you may have kind of spoke to it already, but just so how do you plan or forecast or prepare for what that AI piece? Because this has already kind of happened to me when in terms of building something in Claude, Chat GPT, throwing it in Lovable, folks are using it, and now I'm hitting the thing. How do you forecast or plan for now it's going to cost me 200 a month versus that $50 a month?
Do you have an answer for that, Credit?
I think so. I think I would go through, like, create the plan first. Because I know for me, I just jumped into Lovable and was like, I'm going to create this app because that's how easy it makes it. So I say create an outline, research how many credits or tokens certain jobs will take before you step into the specific AI tool that you're going to use. That's what I've been doing lately, is just planning everything out first and then going in with, okay, this is going to cost me this. Or, you can use Perplexity, if you will, to research, how many tokens would a certain task take in Lovable, in Claude. So yeah, Perplexity is a really good research tool to use for things like that.
Mhm.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah.
You're
And
welcome.
I'm sorry. Did I miss? Okay. I'll add to that, and I'll say this, that I think when we're looking at, one is seeing where we can maximize tools. Like I said, a lot of times we're getting multiple tools, and sometimes those tools do the same thing or do similar things. So one is just kind of doing an inventory check across your tools and make sure that you're actually maximizing the ones that you have access to, right? Some of them also are, some of these tools will build tools that you can use offline, right? So are there ways that you can build something that essentially doesn't have to run on the AI any longer after you have it? And then another thing to be looking into, because these folks haven't listed what their future prices are going to be, right? But another thing that we can be looking at is, again, like, where do we create the efficiencies within our business, and how are we beginning to allocate our parts of our budget going forward? So you should, have some sort of projection or trajectory that, over the next 12 months, we might see costs go up by 10% or 15% in this line item of our budget. So project that there will be an increase, kind of year over year increase. And so then you can start to work out where in your budget you can figure out what you need, what you have, um, and things like that. So hopefully that can help in terms of projections. Like, you might not have an exact number because, again, they're in the stages of just starting to hook folks on. And again, if you go back and look at some of the previous models, right? Like I'm saying Google or Facebook ads or Amazon. Some of these things took years before they got up there, right? But also, I'll use Amazon again. I beat up on Amazon all the time. There's so much there to beat up on. And if you look at some of that, you have people whose entire businesses are built on Amazon, and they have no idea what else they would do. And so they feel stuck, even though they're unhappy with the fact that they aren't making as much money, because Amazon did all types of things with their data, right? Amazon went in and found out what products were performing the highest, and then mimic those products and then place them higher up in the sales process, right? Which then forced folks to have to go out and try to find new ways to market and advertise their store, because Amazon wasn't advertising their store the same way. We see that now with Facebook. If you're scrolling on Facebook or Instagram, you're going to get 2 or 3 organic posts, then you're going to get like 5 paid posts back to back to back. So we know that we have some hindsight now into what they will do, right? And this is not going to be any different. At some point, it will look like this. When that point is, I don't know, but I would probably plan for some level of elevation in that line item budget that you have for your tech stack. So hopefully that's helpful. Other questions?
I have a question
Yep, go ahead.
for Greta.
Yes.
Do you feel we are moving faster to deploy AI than we are to establish controls needed to validate accuracy and reliability? Because ultimately, who's responsible for potential financial, legal, or reputational harm due to misinformation from AI?
Ooh, that's a great question. So,
And I only say that from experience. So some of my clients, I provide a report, and some of the information on there has to be reevaluated because it's not always accurate. So I
right.
want to be able to mitigate that particular issue.
Yeah. And it also depends. Can I ask what tool you're using?
Chat GPT.
Yeah. So, real quick, at the bottom of ChatGPT, it says that ChatGPT can make mistakes. So I don't think that's I think that's more of a warning, if you will. So I would honestly try to find an AI tool to use that helps me cite sources. And I'm not sure that ChatGPT always does that,
Right.
unless you're doing like the deep research or you paying the $200 a month for the pro. But I would definitely either use deep research or find an AI tool that already cites the sources. But I wouldn't just trust ChatGPT to create me a report, if I'm being honest.
I appreciate that.
Yeah. And I'm gonna say Perplexity again. That's the one that's my favorite AI tool. It became my ride or die a long time ago. But
Okay.
yeah, I just think Perplexity because it cites sources. And like unless you use the deep research in Chat GPT or pay the $200 for the pro. But yeah, make sure that it cites the sources.
Thank you, Freda.
You're
Ms. Corey, I
welcome.
saw your hand raised.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that when I am using ChatGPT, I actually ask them to give me the link to the source that they found the information, and I go and double check. So, and I check that source to make sure that the information that ChatGPT is giving me is correct. So, I definitely ask ChatGPT to cite the source of the reports or information that I am using from Chat.
I agree. And I do the same, but then it becomes more additional work, right? To validate
Yes.
that because you end up
Yes.
finding some of those links aren't valid. So it becomes frustrating.
I would say that AI in general, what we know is that there's a lot of flaws, right? So when we talked about the AI adoption, this is where a lot of companies are not exactly happy with the product. There are some big cases that
Exactly.
have been out there, like Deloitte, who have, been sued for producing reports. And this is like a major, a global consulting firm. And then their folks went in and created reports. This has come up in legal issues. Where they are citing or creating fake, case law or case examples and things like that. So at the end of the day, this literally goes back to again there was this whole big, oh my God, AI is going to come and take over our jobs, right? And we're all going to be out of whatever. And what they're saying is they're walking that back very, very steadily. AI is not performing as they expected it to, when they expected it to, and the way they expected it to. So when we go back to kind of saying, what is it taking over? One of the things that's not taking over is final products, right? It is taking
Right.
over entry level, draft level things, right? So when you're saying like, hey, it's taking me a while, I can give you an example. Like, this is a lot of information. I actually study this information, right? So if you follow me on my personal side, I'm talking about this all the time. But to put together this 2-hour presentation, I hope y'all know that I absolutely use AI to help me synthesize this information, pull the most recent reports, help me break down and give examples that were going to make sense, things like that. I would like to say that as I spent a significant amount of time moving from first draft. I think by the time I got here, I'm on like draft 6. So there's iterations, but the time that it would have taken me to get through that first draft, that was condensed. And then I was able to go in and start narrowing down, hey, this information isn't right, which it did. This information isn't right. This didn't synthesize right. I don't think that's correct. Go back and double check, pull your sources over here. I mean, this example doesn't make any sense at all. So it's a two-way process, right? And I have to infuse the fact that I am an expert in this space, and that's how I'm looking at the draft to say yes or no, and then getting this to move forward, right? So hopefully that's helpful again, and where it can cut down on your productivity, but where also you're still going to employ or need to move forward and to get realistic about what its current capabilities are, and what it can or what it can't do. And I'll end with this before we move on because I do want to be mindful of the time. Um, you may have seen that Claude pulled back one of its versions, right? So it put out something and then it took it back within 3 days.
Yep.
And the reason why I took it back is because that level of capability, apparently, the United States government didn't want in the hands of the everyday people. So there are various levels of capability in what's deployed at the consumer level versus what's deployed at an enterprise level versus what's deployed at a governmental level or whatever, right? So it's not necessarily all what AI can or can't do just yet. It also might be what we as a consumer level have access to and the capabilities that we have access to. So these are language, language learning models and things like that. We have to understand kind of what it is exactly that we're dealing with, but understand also how it affects your business, where you sit, where you're currently sitting in that space. So hopefully that answers that. Um, and then I'm gonna keep going just because already 2 hours is a long time, and I want to appreciate everyone who has been here. I hope, like I said, that this information is useful for you. But I do want to make sure that we get to this last segment, which is talking about the silver tsunami, because I think there's a lot that we should understand in terms of what's going on in this space. Everyone is talking about the silver tsunami as being this massive, a wave of opportunity, but I want to get into some of the nuance of that. So first of all, if you are not familiar with the term silver tsunami, this is the business ownership transition that is happening, and it's happening in this huge wave, right? So boomers have already been retiring for quite some time. When we're talking about 2030, that's in 3.5 years. That's not boomers starting to retire. That is the last of the boomers reaching retirement age. A significant amount of them have already retired or are retiring. And so we're seeing this happen, like they're hitting that age of 65, that retirement age, in huge amounts, right? 10,000 a day. So we need to really understand kind of what's going on in this space. And I want to try to make sure that that we understand where these numbers are. 32 million people go to work every day in a business that is owned by a baby boomer who is approaching retirement. So we just talked about what happened to immigration, or what's happening with immigration and how that's affecting our workforce. In the next 3.5 years, 100% of the boomers are going to be at retirement age. Now, we all know that doesn't mean that 100% of them are retiring, but again, this is happening, and 32 million people go to work for someone who is approaching retirement. That is 1 in 3 Americans rely on income from a business that is owned by a boomer. Okay? So we need to understand that there is a wave that is coming of where we do not know where these people, these workers are going to be absorbed into where. We cannot afford to lose all of the boomer-owned businesses. We must maintain some of these businesses in order to maintain the workforce that exists in these businesses. So this is a job story. While we are talking about the opportunity that may exist, this is a job story. So this is a silent crisis. When a business closes down without having a succession plan, those jobs often are closing permanently. Most communities do not have enough businesses to absorb the loss at that scale.
Yeah.
This is why I feel like we are not talking about this enough. Like, I am also in the market for looking at boomer businesses. I am regularly, like Kellen, who's going to be talking a little bit about the financing side of this, knows I'll be like, hey, look at this business I'm interested in. Hey, look at this business I'm interested in. I'm interested in a lot of these businesses, right? But the reality of it is that we're talking about a massive amount, a wave of displacement that is also on the line, okay? So we
Yeah.
should just be understanding what that looks like. Now, we're talking about AI, who gets a lot of congressional hearings on the job displacement. We have not been hearing hardly anything at all on the silver tsunami and how many jobs that could eliminate. So I just want to really talk about that in terms of the community impact, right? Especially when we're talking about communities that are already navigating this K-shaped economy, and then potentially losing anchor businesses that are in our communities that don't have succession plans, okay? So these are some things that we just need to be mindful of. The succession gap is really very, very real. Nearly half of all US business owners are 55 or older, right? And so while all of them are not going to be hitting that retirement age in that 3.5 years, over like the next decade, right, or so, like this is where this is going. Less than 1/3 of them, I'm sorry, less than 1/3 of them have a written succession plan. So they don't know what they're doing. They don't know what they're doing. Only 30% of family businesses actually successfully transfer to a second generation. So even if they thought like, oh, maybe my kids will take over, their kids are not taking over. Okay. So the primary reason why these businesses are failing to transfer is because the business cannot run without the owner. That might sound familiar to a lot of us small businesses where the business is not running without the owner, right? A business that can only run when you're not there is not an asset, it's a job. And we need to understand that. So when you retire from that job ends. There is an opportunity here for us to have some of these conversations with these business owners that are thinking about retiring, are going to be retiring, but we need to understand where they are. They may be retiring within a very short amount of time. They may not have any written plan, and there's very likely that their family will not be taking over. And we need to have an understanding about how much they're involved in their business to understand the viability of taking over that business. So, and then Kellen, you can feel free to jump in anywhere in here, but buying into the future and not just into the decline. So here is another area that I want to make sure we are really being smart about, right? Is where these businesses are going. There are sectors that essentially are headed or are trending downward. You don't want to purchase a business and then have that business be going out of business or trending down, that industry or that sector be trending down in the next decade, right? So as you're thinking about where your opportunity may lie in the silver tsunami, you want to make sure that you are actually evaluating which of those businesses are going to be moving up. For example, we just talked about from the demographic perspective, home health and in-home care, skilled trades are for sure sticking around. That's HVAC, plumbing, electrical. I call those businesses boring, but very profitable. You have B2B services that have recurring revenue. You have logistic businesses, childcare and elder care, right? So these are things that are moving forward. Some that you want to be looking at, right, that you might want to have some caution around. Retail is in direct competition with Amazon. You have high owner dependency businesses with thin margins. So they're not making a ton of net, right? And also they are very dependent upon the owner. It doesn't necessarily mean that you can't take on something. I'll give you an example. You may have an accountant who is getting ready to retire, and maybe they are the only accountant in their business, but they may have a book of business of 30, 40, 50, 60 people that they've been servicing. They're still going to retire. That could be, if you are an accountant, for example, or in a finance industry, you could buy their book of business as an example, right? So they are essentially green lighting you and handing over and helping you to keep and maintain those business relationships as they transition out and you transition in. So it doesn't mean that you can't have a business that has high owner dependency and maybe even thin margins, but you should be thinking about or approaching those with some level of caution. There are sectors whose customer base is structurally shrinking. So those again doesn't mean that they're going all the way away. You could be thinking about blue ocean strategies, or you could be thinking about other ways to take that shrinking customer base and provide a different set of or level of value. But you want to be thinking about these cautiously if they're headed in this direction. So these are some of the ways that you could be thinking about how businesses or how to look at businesses that you could potentially be purchasing. The way that you want to look at this is a framework for looking at this. I'm calling this the buy box, right? You want to define some of these things even before you start looking at a deal, because here's what's going to happen. Millions of deals are getting ready to start coming on to the table. So you want to be able to sift through those deals that make the most sense for you. You want to start looking at your industry type, something that hopefully you understand, or something that can potentially run absentee. So running without owner, if you're so that you understand the language also, right? You might be looking at something that is absentee, owner absentee. Realistic price range. You need to know kind of your ceiling before you look at a deal that just isn't going to make sense. There are lots of ways that you can begin to finance this. So it doesn't just mean that you have to have, if there's a business that's selling for $500,000, it does not mean you have to have $500,000. There's multiple ways to finance a deal in order to go from someone who is ready to sell and ready to retire over to you. but you want to be able to take a look at that. You want to understand the minimum SDE, that is the seller's discretionary earnings. What you're essentially looking at is what did they make that they could that they had discretionary? What extra? How much were they making above not their profit, right? Not their salaries, but like what else could they move around? You want to look at your owner involvement post sale. How much transition time is actually required, and is the seller willing to put in that transition time? So you don't want someone who's just going to hand you over the keys and walk away. They need to help you, or they need to have some idea around helping you understand their systems, their books, their customer base, their employees, their company culture, things like that, right? So you want owner involvement post the sale. Your financing fit. 70% of these deals are seller financed. So you want to know if a seller is even open to carrying a note. That could mean you could bypass a bank altogether. You may not bypass a bank, right? It depends on what their goals are, what your goals are. But there are 70% of these deals currently happening that are being financed by the seller. And then there are deal brokers that you can also get in touch with, right? So depending on deal breakers rather, that you want to know about in advance. So your customer concentration, do they have declining revenue, right? Again, how much is the owner in the business? So what are your deal breakers? So if you put all of this together, you can go in and start assessing deals to find ones that make sense for you.
Yep. I just
Go
wanted to
ahead.
jump in really quick
Yep.
here. So specifically on this slide here, there are a few things that you all should pay attention to. Number three, the minimum SDE is a huge thing when we're talking about financing, whether that is through an SBA loan, a private commercial loan, or sometimes even if you find a specific private investor. That's one of the primary things that they're looking at when they are underwriting, whether that's through an underwriter or just like the investor themselves. Simply because that is what can be a risk adjuster for some of these other items that you see here. We at the SBDC have been seeing an uptick in people exiting their business, and consequently the purchase of existing businesses. So we've been able to get a lot of repetitions in with seeing how this actually kind of goes down in real life. SDE is a huge one. Also, the transition period. So, with an abundance of businesses, what ends up happening is that those underwriting guidelines, as far as is this person a good fit? Um, I don't want to say that they get loose to give everybody the impression that you can just go out and buy a business willy nilly. However, they are looking at that differently, where they are accepting more compensating factors than years past, and getting other people into a business, especially when the cause for the sale is retirement, the retirement estate, um, or just the owner's just looking doesn't have their their succession plan in order. So they are looking for capability, not necessarily one-to-one match. That's another thing. So what I have seen actually is it's kind of a genius idea, is business owners that have maybe like a small business that are starting to purchase complementary businesses and build out their supply chain by buying other businesses. So just keep an eye on that. And if we get through when we get through to the bottom of this, if you have any loan specific questions, I'll be happy to answer them to the reasonable extent in a Q&A session. But these are all things that we can help out with, and as far as the prep with the SBDC.
Thank you for that. And then Mark asks, is there a quick place to gain an understanding of how seller financing would work in these scenarios? And is this something that can be requested or pursued proactively? And
Absolutely.
yeah, go ahead, Kellen. I was going to say, I
Yeah.
say yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Multiple sources for that. SBDC, depending on if you're purchasing, most of the time your loan officer can help too. So there are lots of places to understand that.
Yeah. And so, if there are businesses that are looking at selling also, right? And this is something that you can also, if you're not, even if you're not in a place of selling, begin to ask yourself some of these questions back, right? As a mirror, um, as you're preparing for your, or, as you continue to grow your own business. But could your business operate for 30 days without you, right? Without anything critical breaking? Do you have documented systems and processes, or does the knowledge only live in your head? Do your customer relationships belong to the business, or do they belong to you personally? And that's probably really important, especially as you begin to make a transition, right? If I leave and a customer is going to leave with me, that can become an issue for someone who's looking to buy the business. So the work of making your business sellable is the succession plan, right? And those are things that we should really be looking at now, even as we're continuing to build out our own business, because these are the things that allow us to move from having a job into having a business that we can actually take a break from. But you want to have you want to be able to be thinking about your business in a way that says, I am actually able to step away. This business will keep running. I have systems and processes in place, and the folks that are here as our customers are loyal to this business, or that are, they operate within the business, and it's not just because of me. It's because the work that we do here as a firm is good work, right? So, I want to open up for questions on the Silver Tsunami, and then in general, again, especially because we're at time, I want to make sure, again, that we're honoring your time. I'm willing to stay on here for folks that have questions, but I also want to make sure that everyone knows that we are honoring your time. And so with that, before we get into questions, just as a quick closeout, in case anyone does have to hop off, I do want to thank you for spending your time. I genuinely hope that this was helpful. This is really accumulation of the things that are going on in the marketplace that I believe small businesses oftentimes are not aware of, and that we need to be aware of in order for us to make sound decisions about how we want to move. You will receive an email following this. It does have a short survey that I am asking for you to please complete, because that survey really does help us understand how we can continue to best serve the small business community. We read those surveys, we take them to heart. They are not just something that we do as an exercise. It is very important that we understand what your needs are, so that what we're bringing to you is beneficial and is valuable. The second thing is, I have taken this and synthesized everything into a worksheet. Or I should call it really a handout. It is talking about the 5 things that we covered today. So overall, the market, as well as demographics, AI, the K-shaped economy, and the Silver Tsunami. And there are some questions in there for you to ask yourself, as well as some quick actions, because what I don't want you to have is information overload. And then I'm like, what do we do with all this information, Jice? So what I have in there is, here are some questions for you to ask yourself regarding this, and some things that you could be thinking about doing immediately to help you understand where your business sits in here. So those 2 things are coming to you in an email following this. And so if you do have to hop off, again, I just want to thank you for your time today. Again, I hope this is valuable. And if you have questions, I am here to stick around and answer questions. So what do we got? The floor is yours. Do we have any questions? Awesome. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions so far. If you have any questions, feel free though to come off mute and you can ask them. But I don't see any questions in the chat so far. All right, I'm gonna give us a good countdown, a good 1, 2, 3, and then if that is it, then that is it. All right. Well, I don't see anything. And so then again, I just want to thank everyone for your time this morning. If you do have questions, maybe you want to ask a question that is offline, don't hesitate to reach out. You will see that email come over to you. Again, please do fill out the survey and please do check out the document that I have. I want to make sure that this information is actionable for you. But with that, thank you so much, everyone, for your time this morning. Really enjoyed spending it with you. And I look forward to continuing to see each of you grow your businesses in this economy and beyond. Thank you.